Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host for the program. Before we get into today's interview, I'd like to remind everyone, as always, that our podcast is produced with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. My guest today is Dr. Jennifer Spector, who has had a very successful private practice in podiatry. But after 12 years in that position, she has decided to leave active practice to become an associate editor for Podiatry Today, a widely read professional journal published by HMP Communications. We'll talk about interesting events in her professional development and what led to her decision to leave clinical practice. And now let's hear my interview with Dr. Jennifer Spector. And we're talking this morning with Dr. Jennifer Spector, who is the associate editor of Podiatry Today. Did I get that right, Jennifer? Associate editor, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
And delighted to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And we're looking forward to hearing about your story and your prescription for success later on. And if you don't mind, I'd like to sort of get into the beginnings as to when a career in podiatry became an interest of yours. Was it before undergraduate school? Was it a long-time dream? Were there people in your family that might have had an influence? Where did it come from?
Well, I always wanted to be in healthcare. The evolution of my career goals always kind of fell in that realm. But as a pre-med student in undergrad, I ended up working for a group of podiatrists as an assistant. And I loved that it was a defined specialty with the lower extremity, but that these docs got to see and treat everything within that defined specialty, be it dermatological conditions, vascular issues, musculoskeletal issues. So that was a real appeal point for me. Mm-hmm. Also, I really loved the work that these docs did with patients with diabetes, which had a real resonance with me, with members of my family dealing with diabetes. So it really sold me at that point, and I began podiatry school shortly thereafter.
And I'm a little fascinated in looking at your undergraduate studies that, and I see this not uncommonly, interestingly, but your bachelor's degree was a BA in philosophy of science as opposed to a Bachelor of Science. How did you happen to pick that area of study?
Absolutely. At the University of Pittsburgh, history and philosophy of science is a very interesting and unique major that was made available to us. I took a couple of courses in that category and really loved it. The easiest way I could explain it to people is that it was a lot of medical ethics, medical sociology, things along those lines that I really felt lent itself to who I wanted to be as a physician. I wanted to be able to explore and understand more than just the strict didactic science aspects. And this really gave me the opportunity to explore that area while still maintaining my pre-med track.
I think that's a great approach, frankly, and I'll give you a little personal story, which I guess an interviewer shouldn't do. But as an undergraduate biology major at a liberal arts college in Alabama, I knew that somewhere in the course of study there was going to have to be a philosophy course, and most of my colleagues got that out of the way early, and it was, something like Introduction to Philosophy or Philosophy 101 or something of that nature. And in any case, I deferred until my senior year, and when I went to register for that year, the 101 course was full and I couldn't get in. And my advisor suggested that I take Philosophy of Science, which I thought, well, sure, that'll be easy for me. It's right up my alley. And of course, as you know, it's not really what you would expect in a scientific classroom, but it really opened my eyes to how scientific thought evolved, at least in Western civilization. I found it terribly fascinating, and I was really glad that I had that experience. And it sounds like it worked out well for you as well.
It really did. I think it gave me some important background and important perspective, so that when you're faced with challenges and unique situations in the clinical world, I had a little bit of something to grasp onto as far as, knowledge outside of the typical expected areas.
Mm-hmm. So at what time in your undergraduate studies did you make that decision that podiatry was going to be the career for you?
It was actually between my sophomore and junior years. I was clearly on a path to becoming a physician, but I didn't have any particular specialty that I was, married to or dedicated to at that point. And my track changed pretty quickly. I enjoyed this so much and investigated a little bit more about podiatry and about the profession that I decided to throw myself gung-ho into this path when I realized that I could take a shot and try to gain early admission after 3 years of undergraduate work. I had a couple extra credits under my belt that I had earned along the way and figured, well, I'm going to give this a shot. Why not? Took my MCATs, gave it a whirl, and I was accepted to the schools that I had applied to. So I was fortunate enough to begin my journey a little bit earlier than most, which in the marathon that is medical training sort of served me well years later. But I made a choice, took a dive, and never looked back.
And were there any influencers or heroes along the way that you remember that sort of pushed you in that? Well, I won't say pushed, but gave you the inspiration to go in that direction?
I think it was a compilation of several people that gave me the right nudges at the right time. And I think when you look back, you might not have even realized at the moment how important these people were or how important their nudges were. But looking back, there was a Dr. McDougall at West Penn Hospital in Pittsburgh who, as a high school student, I shadowed him in the OR. Now, this is before the days of HIPAA, before all of the privacy acts came into place. I don't think this experience would be available to high school students these days.
Not without a lot of paperwork.
Absolutely not. So I was fortunate enough to tag along with him in the operating rooms. He is a general surgeon. And I just really enjoyed my time with him. And at the time I was thinking of going to school to become a physician assistant. And he said to me, he goes, Jennifer, I think you'll succeed at whatever you want to, but I think you're selling yourself short. So I really took his words to heart and thought a lot about it and decided to refocus my efforts on becoming a physician. So he was probably the first little nudge. And then when I worked for that group of podiatrists back home in Pittsburgh, Dr. Stephen Connor and Dr. Mark O'Donnell, they were just fantastic mentors. They told me the honest truth about their experiences in the field, the good and the bad, but they both enjoyed their work, enjoyed their lives. And I really was able to have a very realistic outlook on what my life might look like. While still being able to hang on to their enthusiasm and joy in the work that they did. So they definitely made a big impact for me. as did my family. They probably thought I was crazy. This 19, almost 20-year-old saying, I'm going to give this a shot to leave home and go away to school when I went to an undergrad college 20 minutes from where I grew up. They probably thought I was a little bit crazy trying to make this all happen in the time frame that I did, but they supported me the entire way.
Sounds like they did the right thing.
I'm very glad that they did. At the time, too, this gentleman that I was dating, who is now my husband of 15 years, probably also thought I was nuts. We're in a fairly new relationship. He's getting to know this extremely type A, very highly motivated individual who just decides she's going to up and try to graduate from college early and leave him to go across the state. And he never questioned it. He supported me the entire way. And he was also there throughout my training, my residency, my practice. So I think having people close by to you that support you and see your vision, whether they be professional, family, or friends, is so important.
I think it sounds like you picked well in terms of a future spouse, because he was clearly very supportive. And so the move was made to Philadelphia, podiatry school at Temple. And I'm always interested to know if that transition was much like what you expected. Was it a great big surprise? What were the surprises and the things that turned out to be exactly like you expected?
I think I expected it to be a challenge, which it was, although I don't know that I had a grasp on what that would entail. I definitely went through some growing pains moving from my hometown to a much larger metropolitan area where I knew very few people. I had a few relatives about an hour away, but that was the closest I had. And I was not used to the big city. Although Pittsburgh is not a small rural area by any stretch of the imagination, it's definitely a different animal as far as the city goes. Educationally, I think the thing that surprised me the most were the differences in a smaller educational environment versus a larger one. I came from the University of Pittsburgh, which had very large lectures, and the symposiums would sometimes have 100 students or more in them. Certainly there were smaller classes as well, but I was used to a very, very populated student existence, whereas in podiatry school, as it is in allopathic and osteopathic, the class sizes are much smaller. So you're with the same people every class, day in and day out, which has its benefits and its drawbacks, certainly. That was something that I wasn't expecting, but I felt was adaptable at a fairly early stage.
So you felt pretty comfortable from the outset?
I did. I was very lucky in the very beginning. Temple Podiatry has this interesting program that is completely voluntary, that you can come to the campus and move in about 2 weeks early and take some mock classes that are run by upper class students, just to sort of get an idea as to the mechanics of the academic day, get to know the school, get to know some of the professors and your students ahead of time. And I did take advantage of that, being on the young end of my class. It was invaluable to me because I was able to find other students at a very early stage that I was able to make connections with. And those people are still some of the people that I'm very close with today.
It sounds like a great idea. And as you made your way through the curriculum, Did you find it to be about as you expected, or did you find really unexpected challenges along the way? Were there struggles, or did the whole thing go fairly smoothly? What do you think?
I think I had to work harder than I ever did in any academic part of my life. I guess I was a very fortunate individual throughout my learning career in high school and undergraduate, that I don't want to say things came easy to me, because I certainly worked hard, but I feel the further I got into my journey, the harder and harder I had to work to maintain a level of performance that I was happy with.
And was that more of the complexity of the material to be absorbed, or was it more so the volume of material that had to be absorbed?
For me as an individual, I think it was the volume. I'm pretty good by nature at seeing details and complexities, which has been both a blessing and a curse in my professional life. But I feel in this case, it was the sheer volume, which can be intimidating. But I think if you continue to just break it down into manageable parts, come up with a plan and stick to it as best you can, that it will, work itself out in the end.
And it sounds like you were fortunate enough to be born with that mindset. You were able to progress at a rather advanced pace, certainly through undergraduate school. So it sounds like, in spite of the expected academic challenge, if you will, that podiatry school was what you would consider to be successful in your mind. And then the next thing to be considered was your postgraduate training. So how did you make that decision about where you would go and what you would be doing?
Well, for me, it was all about the geography. I am a Pennsylvania girl at heart. And as I still live in Pennsylvania, I personally did not aspire to get my postgraduate training on the West Coast or anywhere super far from where I was familiar. I was starting to set down roots. My then boyfriend became my fiance, who is now my husband. So we were thinking about where we would want to start our lives and where his career as a physical therapist was going to take him. And this
was right about the time that you were going to start your residency?
Yes, I got married in my first year of residency. So right around this time, we were sort of thinking about where we wanted to, start our lives together. And so I did externships in my fourth year of podiatry school throughout both the eastern and western portions of Pennsylvania. I visited a few programs in New Jersey, and I externed at a hospital in Delaware, which is where I ultimately chose to go to my residency. And it was a fantastic choice for me because the hospital system was an extremely pro-resident supportive system. And it gave me a chance to get some training outside of Pittsburgh or Philadelphia that I hoped could lend itself to my future practice wherever that ended up being.
And same question as before, were there particular challenges that you had not expected in residency, or was it more like what you thought it would be? What was the whole experience like?
I think that I knew what to expect. One of the wonderful things about the externships that we do in our fourth year is you get to spend an entire month at these programs. And if that's one of the programs that you ultimately end up choosing as your residency, you've already been there for a month snapshot to have an idea of what the day-to-day life looks like for those residents. So I think I understood what call would look like, for instance. I think I understood what the rounding process would look like. I think the only surprise in the beginning that then again you adapt out of necessity was in our program, we had such a high volume of cases available to us that sometimes it was difficult to figure out where we should be at any given time. You know, which cases we would be best helpful in, whose case is going to go covered versus uncovered with a resident. And, as a first year resident, those decisions can be a little bit intimidating, but we had our more seasoned residents able to help us with those decisions.
That sounds like a fairly healthy situation from the standpoint of mentally healthy. I don't hear you saying anything about ever having been felt intimidated or overworked or taken advantage of or any of that sort of thing. Am I correct about that? Was this a fairly collegial learning environment where you felt comfortable during those years?
Yes, I really did. I had some phenomenal co-residents over the years, both those that came before me and those that were after me. And out of necessity, we only had one resident per training year. So we had 3 residents at any given time. We had to work together to make this system work and to make everything run smoothly. So you very quickly find out if you're compatible in that way. And I was very lucky over those years that we really were. The vast majority of the attendings that we worked with were also extremely focused on teaching. Whether they be the podiatry attendings or the off-service attendings. Really, I think I got spoiled in that respect, in that when I left residency and was working in a different health system, that there was not necessarily the same multidisciplinary push as I had experienced in my training. But no, I was fortunate enough. I know, unfortunately, trainees can sometimes experience those negative effects, and I was very fortunate that I did not.
Yeah, it sounds like you did very well. And then comes another great big transition. It's time to get away from training, and you become you take on your position at the top of the heap. You're in private practice now. This is in 2014. Now, at this point, you're exactly right. I'm reading my notes backwards. I beg your pardon. So
that's quite all right. I would have liked to have stayed in training a little longer, had that safety net for a little longer, but not.
I'll bet you would, and I guess that's kind of where I was going. In the training environment, we are typically, if we're fortunate, and it sounds like you were, we are surrounded by people who really have an interest in our success. So time comes to move on beyond that, and you're moving into private practice. And I'm very interested to know what that transition was like, what the articulation was like between those two entirely different ways of life, if you will.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right that we have all these people surrounding us during residency who really are, if we're fortunate, are invested in our success. And then I went into private practice. I was an associate, so I worked for another doctor, which was the way I wanted to enter private practice. I didn't have aspirations to hang a shingle or be a business owner per se. I wanted to contribute to the success of the practice, but I wanted to focus on patients as much as I possibly could. And it was a really exciting time right out of residency. Everything is new, and you've got this newfound empowerment about your professional life. But it's also really overwhelming in the beginning because all of a sudden now you are responsible for credentialing, which in and of itself can be extraordinarily intimidating and frustrating. You have to start, at least in podiatry, preparing properly for your board certification. We have a pathway that we follow We become board eligible when we finish residency and pass the appropriate testing phases, but we then collect cases over our early practice that will then be submitted for consideration. So we are constantly thinking about, do I have the right variety of cases? Do I have the right documentation? We're constantly thinking about that. And the safety net isn't always there. I distinctly remember my first few OR cases as an attending were just surreal because you're doing all the things you normally do, but you expect that attending to come walking in the door behind you. And then you think to yourself, oh my gosh, that's me. And if you're working in a teaching hospital, you may have residents who are in there helping you. And you think, oh my gosh, last month I was one of you. What's the, where did that transition happen? But overall, I think if you surround yourself with the right support, again, it's definitely an achievable challenge.
My experience was very much the same, and I was gratified to find out that all along the way there are typically people, even in private practice, that you can go to for additional wisdom because they've been at it longer than you have. Mm-hmm. Of course, there comes a time when you are that person. You're at the end of the line, and that's an interesting thing to talk about. But I'm always fascinated to hear physicians and surgeons talk about that part of their life, that transition in their life when they are in a situation where they're expected to be fully trained, and yet we all have been there. We know that there are times when we would like to have some advice, and where do you go to find that? And it sounds like that at least early on that was fairly available to you, and it worked out reasonably well. If I got that right?
Yes, absolutely. It's something that I'm very grateful for even to this day.
I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Our mission at MD Coaches is to educate, encourage, and empower physicians to be strong healthcare leaders. Our team of certified physician coaches brings real-world experience from their years of medical practice to our coaching clients. Working with physicians at all stages of their professional career, we know what a challenge today's healthcare landscape can present, especially to a new physician just getting started. We work with our clients to find answers and develop strategies that positions them for success. If you're ready to start mapping your own path to professional success, simply go to our website at mymdcoaches.com and send us an email to set up a complimentary session. Remember, at MD Coaches, we see you, we believe in you, and we are here for you.
So you were in that practice for about 6 years and decided to make a move to another position. Can you tell us about what led to that and what it was like?
Sure. For me, there were many reasons that led me to move from my first associate position into a different one. Although for me, it was primarily having become a mother in that time frame. My son, Ethan, is now almost 10 years old. And so around the time that I made that transition, he was about 3. And I was working full time, which, as we know, for a physician, full-time does not mean 40 hours a week. Sometimes it means just as much as you worked as when you were a resident.
It pretty much means full-time in my experience.
Exactly.
Always.
I used to say full-time is way more than full-time, and part-time, which is what I transitioned into, actually means full-time to the rest of the non-medical world. Mm-hmm. But I was looking for something with a little bit more flexibility. I was looking for something where I would have a little more ability to change my schedule if something was important to me for my family. And so that meant that it was time for me to find a different opportunity. And I did. And I worked as an associate again in another practice where this particular doctor is a fantastic doc who also had young children. So we were able to connect on that level. And she was very supportive, when I had something going on with my family, or if I found that certain work hours were more productive for me to focus on those. So it was a good choice and a good transition for me at the time.
And you stayed in that position for about 5 years, it looks like. And then at some point, you came to a place where you felt like it was time to do something really different, major decision, right?
Yes, very much so.
Let's hear the details.
It was a slow evolution where over many years, as many of us have seen in healthcare, a lot started to change. And I found it interesting, even going from one position to another, how different the credentialing process was, how many more hoops I had to jump through to obtain the same level of credentialing that I had had in my previous position. I also found over many years that the way we had to practice changed. When I was in my first position, we made the change over to electronic medical records, which I felt for me was a fairly easy transition, both on the inpatient and outpatient levels.
You're the very first person that I have ever heard say that. And I'm fascinated to know that someone somewhere has had that experience, and I'm sure you're not the only one. But
right,
it's been rough for most of us, I think, and it may have to do with the fact that I had been practicing for 30 years when I began to get involved in it. But I'm a little surprised to hear you say that, and would be interested to hear more if you care to.
No,
sort of
absolutely.
expand on that.
You know, thinking about it, it might have something to do with my particular generation. I was born in a year that doesn't quite hit Generation X nor the millennials. We're sort of in that very in-between 3 to 5 year zone where what makes us interesting is we lived and experienced life both prior to and during the age of the internet. So I think my generation in particular has an appreciation for both the older way of doing things and the newer way of doing things. So I think we just by nature have been very adaptable to the digital world without it being the only way we can function either. Mm-hmm. So that might be a contributor to it. It could also be that I was lucky that the platforms I used in the earlier part of my career were fairly user-friendly. We won't bash any particular names, but I know there's a few out there that are known for not being all that doctor friendly, and I did use those later in my career. But I found it personally very productive because I've always typed faster than I can write. So as opposed to writing a good old fashioned SOAP note, if I had the opportunity to be typing that, for me, it was actually an efficiency helper. But that being said, our practice did not have the setup where I'd be looking at a computer screen as opposed to the patient. I was still face-to-face with the patient. Right. Whereas in podiatry, you sort of have to be because you're very hands-on with a lot of things. Unlike some other specialties, you can't really do your exam or carry on your conversation without being truly face-to-face with the patient. So,
and just to make sure I understand where you are with this, and I hope people are interested in this part of the conversation because I think it has something to do with some other things that we're going to talk about later. But
sure,
did you have any significant experience with EMR during your residency at all, or did it appear when you became after you started in practice?
It was a hybrid. The hospital system that I was working in did store a significant amount of information electronically. We would obtain labs every day electronically. We would look up dictated reports electronically. However, there was still a full and complete paper chart on every patient.
So it was not so much the cash register that it has become today.
No, it was more a resource library. I think you could characterize it as, but there was very little we entered into the electronic system itself.
Well, it's kind of interesting to me, and one reason that I'm sort of interrogating you about this is because in the beginning, I was extraordinarily enthusiastic about the EMR because it just made so much sense, because it was a way to really help us. And kind of coincidentally, when I went into a solo practice toward the end of my surgical career, the electronic medical record that I bought for my office was actually one that had been designed for a podiatry practice. And I found it very easy to work with and quite helpful to me in much the same way that you're talking about.
Great.
However, as HIPAA began to get involved and the ability to design these things kind of moved away from physicians and into the hands of great big companies that didn't really have any understanding about medicine, it seemed to me that it got a good bit more difficult at that point. So, and I didn't mean to take the story away from you, but this is an area that I think is worth talking about, primarily for some things that I want to get you to talk about later. But apart from the EMR, what else was different about this new practice that you were in?
Well, I don't think it was unique to the new practice per se. I think it was just happening in the timeline of many healthcare practitioners. I think that we began to have a lot more pushback from insurance companies if we wanted to order certain tests like MRIs.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted to prescribe certain medications, if we wanted to see patients with a higher frequency due to a risk level that we identified. These things all started to get questioned and pushed back. And it became, are we really practicing medicine to the best of our capabilities, or are we practicing to the requirements of the insurance companies? I also think that it became a much different society on the part of the patient. I think the patients started to have a lot more financial burden when it came to their healthcare, higher copays, higher deductibles. The patients became very conscious of where their healthcare dollars were going. And so they would start to question, do I really need to come back for that follow-up visit?
Right.
Do I really need that medication? Do I really need that test? Or I can't afford that test, doc. What do I do now?
Mm-hmm.
And it became, a little bit frustrating, because although you certainly respect the cost factor and you certainly want to provide valuable care, I think even though we really are conscious of these things, I think it started to alter the patient-doctor relationship a little bit too. And, we would get even more pushback from patients when all we were trying to do was do our best for them. I noticed that patients a lot of times would have unrealistic expectations for their healing process or for their recovery. And, I was having to manage those expectations more and more, which I didn't mind. It's part of forming a very fruitful patient-doctor relationship and really making that connection with them. But it became more and more discouraging over time, in that I would be spending a lot of time being worried about these patients, about their outcomes, about, whether or not I was going to be able to provide them the level of care that I so very much wanted to. And it started to weigh on me. So that sort of sparked an idea in my head that, what else is out there? Is there any way for me to use my skills and use my training in a way that's not going to impact my stress, my mental health, impact my family so much? My son was getting to the age where he was old enough to know when I was there and when I wasn't, whether I was present with him in the moment or not. And I had been really lucky in the past several years to be part of some leadership opportunities. And as I had gotten involved in the American Association for Women Podiatrists, I had been flexing some muscles and honing some skills in writing and editing, lecturing and leadership. And I thought, maybe someday I'll use that for something. I just didn't expect that time to come as soon as it did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What turned into it was sort of my 5-year plan, recertify my boards one more time, and then I'll see where life takes me. My son will be in high school by then. Slowly started to turn into my 2-year plan. And then, oh, wow, maybe I want to move on this now. And I really just came to the conclusion that I wanted to take a leap for myself. My commute was pretty long by choice. I joined this practice those years prior knowing that it was pretty far from where I lived. But that commute was starting to weigh on me. And I said, if I'm going to make a leap and leave this practice, I'm going to really make a leap and see what I can do. So really long story made a little bit shorter. I decided to give it a whirl.
And was this, I'm just trying to get an idea about what your mindset was at this time. Was it more of, gosh, I think I'm at a point where I really shouldn't be doing what I'm doing anymore because I just dread it? Or was it more of, gee whiz, I really think I want to do something different because I think I might be better at something else? Can you, if you can just enlarge on that a little bit, I think people would be very interested to hear how these things happen, because they happen to a lot of us.
Absolutely. I don't think that I was at a point where I was dreading my work. I still, at its very, very core, loved what I was doing. I loved working with patients, being around patients. I used to tell my husband that when I was in the OR, the blinders would go up and, you hyper focus in on what you're doing in that moment and nothing else matters. I still had all that. But I think I was at the point where my heart wasn't in it as much.
Mm-hmm.
I think that my heart was a little tired, and was a little bit downtrodden. So it wasn't quite to the point of dreading it, but it's certainly I didn't have the enthusiasm and the drive that I once did. I wasn't as excited. I would go to medical conferences and hear about these new developments and these new things going on. And instead of hearing it like, wow, that's really exciting, I can't wait to incorporate that into my practice, it was more reframed in oh gosh, I'm not doing that. That's not good. Yeah. I should be doing better than this. So I think I was not, I just didn't have the passion that I'd had for all those years.
I hear that a lot from surgeons who say, I'm just the happiest human on the planet as long as I'm in the operating room. But the instant that I come out, it just doesn't seem like I belong. So tell us some more about that transition. What happened next?
Well, I did a lot of research. So this is probably over about an 18-month time frame that it took me in total to make this transition. For 12 out of those, well, actually about 15 out of those 18 months, I was still practicing. I started to quietly research what might exist for me outside of the clinical realm. I started to try to figure out how to network, how to write a resume, things that we don't really learn as physicians. Mm-hmm. We live and die by our CV, and networking is a different animal. So I did eventually enlist the services of a physician coach. And that person was fantastic as far as helping me take all of this information that I had gathered on my own and figure out how to direct it. That's where I struggled. And she helped me identify 3 or 4 areas where I might be a good fit and helped me to sort of direct my research and networking in those directions, which was...
Sounds like a pretty good coach.
Immensely helpful, because I think I had so many thoughts and so many ideas and so much information that I had gathered that I just had no idea what to do with it. And for a long time, it was a very scary process because as I progressed through this, I gave notice at my job, which for me was a 90-day notice period. And during that time, I was applying for positions as a medical writer or a medical science liaison, or various utilization review positions. And I wasn't hearing very much. So it was very scary for a while for me. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what did you do?
And if I could, and if I could just ask you one other thing, did your partners realize that something was going on during this exploratory period? Were they completely surprised when you announced that you were actively looking for another position? How did that go?
She was floored. I don't think she had any idea. I think I did a good job of hiding it from everybody. I think on the outside, I did a really good job of making it look like everything was just status quo for me.
Wow.
Except for those who were immediately around me, like my husband and some of my closest friends. I feel kind of bad in that respect. When I gave her my notice, I think I shocked the heck out of her.
Yeah.
But as time went on, I think she looked back and then was able to see it, and was very supportive. I must say, she was very, very cordial and collegial throughout the process, and is very supportive of where I am now. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah, I don't think my patients had any idea. I don't think my employer had any idea. It was definitely something that I carried very quietly and very close to the vest.
That's interesting. So let's go ahead and finish the story. This was really quite a transition away from clinical medicine and into publishing. And how did you make those connections, and what has it been like for you since?
Yeah, absolutely. I was very fortunate. Pretty much right after I finished seeing patients in my past practice, I was sending lots and lots of resumes out through LinkedIn and the various, job platforms, and was looking forward to having a few summer months with my son. But then a job that I had applied for it just was for an associate editor position. I recognized the name of the company and knew that they had one journal that was a podiatry journal. And I thought to myself, how wonderful would that be if that's who this job is for? But also knowing that that company had many wound care and cardiology-based journals that I still felt that my skill set and my training would be applicable to. So I said, okay, I'm going to go for this. And I heard back from them, and lo and behold, it was for the publication Podiatry Today. So I'm doing this Zoom conference interview initially, and I'm doing a little happy dance to myself that nobody can see because it's in my field. I mean, how amazing was this? And
yeah.
I was also lucky at this point, by the way, that I was starting to hear back. So for people that are going on a non-clinical pursuit, hang in there. You will start to hear things. I was starting to get responses in the world of test development and test question development, along with the editorial world. But this particular opportunity was so close to my heart, and I was very fortunate going through multiple interviews that they offered me the position.
And there you are, and that started just this past year, right?
Correct, in June. So I've been with this position for about 7 or 8 months now.
Still in the honeymoon? Everything going okay?
Everything's going really well. I really love the work that I'm doing. The company that I work for is fantastic, and the team that I'm very fortunate to work with has been so supportive. You know, they recognize that I'm coming from a clinical world and I wasn't coming from a publishing or journalism world. Mm-hmm. And they've been very patient and very helpful in teaching me the ropes and showing me things that I never thought I'd be learning. I'm doing a lot with writing and editing and managing social media, which is a whole new world to me. Managing content on the website for our publication, which is a whole new world. And I learn something new every day. And what I love is I'm very respected for my clinical background and expertise. But in no way have I been judged for my lack of expertise in the publishing world. They've just been so generous with their time and their advice that I just feel very supported, and hopefully I'm contributing to them in an equal fashion.
I'm very glad to hear that. And I guess that was probably going to be my next question. And that is, do you feel that your experience as a clinician is appreciated as it really should? I think we all know lots of medically and surgically trained people who are employed in the publishing world who have had very little experience in the clinical world, and to have someone like yourself who comes with that experience, I think, is a tremendous asset, and I do hope your employer appreciates that.
They really do, on all levels. I am part of a larger division within our company that is the wound care and podiatry division. So overall, there are several journals within that division, and there's some crossover, obviously. And these, my coworkers and supervisors and everybody all along the line has really been so great about everything. I tell my husband it's sort of unique in that my employer sends surveys regularly to employees to assess how the employees are feeling, how engaged they are. And I said, it's kind of backwards from when patients used to do surveys on us all the time.
That's nice.
It is. It's a refreshing change of pace.
Indeed it is. Well, Jennifer, I want to get into one other thing before we ask you to give us your personal prescription for success, and that has to do with a piece that you did for your own journal that I think is applicable certainly not only to the world of podiatry, but to all the disciplines within medical and surgical care, and that is physician burnout. You published a lengthy editorial piece in the journal on that subject, and it is really a fabulous piece of work. And I'd like to just hear you talk about your decision to make that something that you would like about, and offer us any bits of wisdom that you might have picked up in the process, because this is a critical problem that, I guess in the medical and surgical world, it is, people are fairly aware of it and it gets talked about a lot, but beyond our borders, I'm not sure if there's a greater appreciation for what we're talking about. But this business of physician burnout is, I think, something that is going to have to garner a significant amount of attention if we are going to continue to have effective practitioners among us. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. I agree with you completely that this is a very critical issue. I was a little bit intimidated when my executive editor first asked me to take on this story. I was a little bit worried, honestly, at first, if I should be the one to tell this, being that I was sort of fresh out of that world and out of that experience. But then I thought about it and I thought, well, I'm in a really unique position to share this story. And in my research, I wasn't all that shocked to find the information that I did. But as you know, it's such a pervasive issue in healthcare overall, but especially among physicians, where there are significant percentages of people who on a regular basis are feeling either helpless or hopeless in their career. They feel that they really aren't making a difference. They feel that they're just sort of cogs in the wheel. And it's wearing down on them. And I think it's wearing down specifically on some of the best of us. A lot of the people that are experiencing anxiety, depression, lack of satisfaction in their work, are some of the more the higher performing docs in our field. If you look at the characteristics of physicians that experience burnout or symptoms of burnout, those same characteristics are almost what we would want in our physicians. People who are attentive, people who are compassionate and caring and dedicated and motivated. Unfortunately, those are some of the docs that are experiencing this.
That's exactly what I'm seeing. Those people that are most dedicated seem to be the ones that are most disappointed, and one leads to the other.
You're absolutely right. And you touched on a very important point prior, that if this continues, we're going to be continuing to lose some of the best doctors that we would want for our own physicians, you know? And I think there's no easy answer. I think two big things that can happen is the destigmatization of mental health issues amongst healthcare practitioners. I think we don't like to show weakness in our field. I don't think we like to show any potential flaw, even though these are not flaws. I think a lot of us may view them in that respect. So I think fostering an environment in healthcare where healthcare practitioners can seek help when they are struggling would be one big step in the right direction. Some of the statistics surrounding physician suicide were just shocking. And you have to wonder how many more we don't hear about as well. And then also learning skills at an early age of our training, I think, would also be very helpful as far as resiliency and coping skills and time management, things that are, less didactic and more practical, I think would also be helpful to iron out some of the stressors. Certainly that doesn't address any of the systemic issues that certainly need to be looked at, but at least it would be a start and something that's tangible to start with those few concepts for sure.
And if you would please, there will be people in the audience who will want to read what you have produced. So if you could just tell us how to get on the internet and find your article on burnout, it's really terrific.
Absolutely. The article is available on podiatrytoday.com. It's from our January issue, so you could certainly search our website under burnout and it will come up, or you could search for the January issue. I was really fortunate to get a lot of great feedback from both colleagues and near and far about that article. And a lot of what people shared with me was, wow, you really tapped into what I've been experiencing, or that sounds like my life, or that is really hitting home for me more than I thought it would. And while I was very touched at them reaching out to me, it also, made me sad that so many of our colleagues are dealing with this and we probably don't even know it. So I encourage people to certainly read the article if it's a good starting point for you, but to certainly look at your own practices and your career, your future career, and certainly find ways to make a small difference here and there within your system to hopefully be part of the solution.
Yeah, it's a really great discussion, and for anyone who might be interested, it is fortunately available, as Jennifer says, through the Podiatry Today website. You can read it at no charge, which is a very generous thing for your publishers to make available to us. It's very well written, very well documented in terms of the research that you did, and I would certainly commend it to everyone. And thank you so much for making it available to us. And at this point, Jennifer, what I'd like to do is move along to what gave name to our podcast, and that is Your Prescription for Success. This is the point where I'll just back out of the picture and close my mic, and we will listen with interested ears as Dr. Jennifer Spector gives us her personal prescription for success. Jennifer?
Thanks, Randy. I think if there were 3 pieces of advice I could give to young practitioners or even a younger version of myself, I think the first thing I'd say is don't force your career into a cookie cutter path. To me, in 15 years, your career will not look like anything you think it will. But that's okay. In fact, it's a wonderful thing. You'll be doing things that you love, and you'll be using your unique training and experience. I think a second thing I would tell myself or young practitioners is to keep pursuing things that you love outside of medicine. I know I was surprised when they came into play in my professional life. I danced for 13 years as a child, and then I started back up again around age 30. Dance podiatry became an important part of my practice, especially in the latter part of my clinical career. Also, I've been writing in various ways since I was a child. It's something that during undergrad and podiatry school sort of got backburnered in the day-to-day rigors of that life, but it found its way back into my life through various educational and leadership pursuits. And these pursuits are what led me to my current position. And the last thing is definitely make sure you keep working hard. Now, that can mean working hard for your career, your family, or even yourself. I have found that a strong work ethic will never fail you. It's very important. But I've learned that it's also not just enough to work hard in your job. Of course, that's the foundation, but it's okay to show up and work hard for your family, to work hard for your peers, and to show up for yourself. So many times in medicine, we put ourselves last. And sometimes it's okay if we don't do that. So those are the 3 things that I think I would share as my prescriptions for success.
Well, Dr. Jennifer Spector, that is really good advice, very inspirational advice, and we want to thank you very much for sharing with us. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners where they can find you and interesting things about you. So if you'd like to tell us about your websites and your email address and any meetings that you're going to be leading or anything that you would like to share, this is the place to do it. So I'm giving you the floor once again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved this conversation, and I hope that in some small way I can contribute and make a small difference to those entering the field. I can be contacted most easily through the Podiatry Today website, which is podiatrytoday.com. We also have social media active pages on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just under Podiatry Today, you can find us. I'm also the current president of the American Association for Women Podiatrists, which is a fantastic organization supporting women in the field of podiatric medicine and surgery. And we can be found at AmericanWomenPodiatrists.com. We do have a scientific conference every 18 to 24 months that is a fantastic event that we really get a great panel of speakers in an inspirational environment. So I'm very proud to be part of both of these organizations, and I welcome you to learn more about us and reach out if you have any questions that I can help you with.
Dr. Jennifer Spector, Associate Editor of Podiatry Today, thank you once again for being with us today. It's been a lot of fun, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
And with that, it's time to bring this episode of Prescription for Success to a close. If you enjoy our program, we'd really love to make you part of it. Just visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com and click on the Contact Us button at the top of the home page. Then all you have to do is scroll to the bottom, click on the big red Record button, announce yourself, and then read us your own personal prescription for success. And then we'll play your voice on the air. Don't forget, it's not just for doctors. Anyone involved in healthcare is welcome to participate. We appreciate your support very much. Thanks again so much for listening, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.